Welcome, everyone. You're listening to How We Heal the podcast. I'm Kir Noel, medical intuitive, your host. Our sponsor is the medicinebuddhawithin.com, intuitive training for all. Check out their website and be registered to be invited to all the upcoming trainings. Now let's begin our show. Welcome, everyone. This is How We Heal the podcast. I'm Kir Noel. Today, my guest is Detective Sherri Cameron. She is the first family member, second cousin, Sherri and I, to appear and share on the podcast. Welcome. Sherri is a very impressive woman. After 25 years of service to the Boise Police Department, she became a detective. She launched a domestic violence response program. She is also a trainer on the autism program for first responders. And she helps people in the sense of victim service specialist that she became after she retired from her 25 years of service. It wasn't enough for Sherri to just give everything she had to her community. She came up with more to do, and I love that about her. So I'm very interested to hear how Sherri Cameron became Sherri, and we know that she'll be happy to share today. She's here. Thanks for being here. Welcome.
Thank you, Kir. It's a pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate this. So I will start with how I became first a detective with Boise Police Department. That was a very long process. So I started with Boise Police Department back in 1998. And really what kind of drove me to look at that profession, initially, it isn't one I was going to go into. I wanted to be a prosecutor. I wanted to go to law school. But back in that time period, in the late 90s, especially in rural Idaho, which is where I was born and raised, there was not a lot of options on going to law school. We had one law school in Moscow, University of Idaho.
And Moscow's Idaho, right? Just let everyone know we're not going to Russia.
Yes, University of Idaho. And I was attending Boise State University. I was obtaining my degree. My goal was to go on to law school and, like I said, become a prosecutor. During my time in college, however, I met my daughter's father and we got married. He was a firefighter. And so that presented some challenges because he worked for a local agency and it wasn't like he could just leave that agency and go to another one easily. So we kind of had to shift some of what my next chapter, I guess, looked like. I continued working my way through college. I obtained my degree. Shortly after that, I had my first child, my daughter. And that, of course, kind of changed the trajectory of where I wanted to go because now I was married, also with a daughter. And so that presented some challenges. So I kind of had to refocus on how could I give back to my community? And I think it might be helpful just to share a little background in my life. I grew up on a farm in what was Eagle, Idaho. It was very small back then. That's before an influx of people came in. And my closest neighbor, I had to jump on my horse and go see my friends.
Wow.
I didn't have great transportation.
That's rural.
Living on a farm. And so I was very deeply rooted in my community. Since the time I've grown up, I've traveled across the world. I love to visit other places. I love to travel, but my roots are absolutely here in the community. This is where I've always given back to my community. I was very proud to be from here. I attended college here. I've lived here my whole life, but I haven't stayed here. I've traveled around so that I could experience other places and people and culture and ethnicity and see all these different places. But going back to the college time, I again had to change the trajectory of where I wanted to go. And I actually took a class from, at the time, it was called Police in Our Community by a lieutenant with Boise Police Department. And that kind of began my fascination with it. Part of what helped with that fascination is that my grandfather, who was really my idol and my hero.
Is this, which
Walter
grandparent?
Cameron.
Walt.
Walter
Walt.
Cameron.
I meant
Yes.
Walt. Okay.
Yes.
Walt.
And he really was, he was a father figure to me. And he was present my whole life. It was his farm that we were farming. And so he really taught me my work ethic, my family values, but he also gave me kind of the beginning vision of where my career took me. When my grandfather was in World War II, he ended up leaving after the war and moving to Idaho. He had no family here, and he brought his wife and his, at the time, young daughter to Idaho. He was originally from Wyoming. And when he moved here with some of his war friends, opened the first veterinary clinic in Canyon County. And my grandfather joined the Canyon County posse. So he was actually in law
That's colorful.
enforcement. It is. He
Law
was in law
enforcement. Okay.
enforcement
Wow.
as a deputy sheriff riding a horse. And I grew up on horses my entire life. My grandfather always had horses for us. I rodeoed. I was in 4-H. I was in Future Farmers of America. I mean, I was a very down-to-earth, salt of the earth,
It's very grounding, very grounded.
It is. So that's my background. And so my grandfather kind of started that. And then when I took this class, I thought of him and I thought that might be interesting. It's a way to serve and give back to my community and
Now, was
protect
he
my
alive
community.
was he alive when you started as a police officer?
He was. Not only was he alive, but he actually got to do a ride along when I was hired and on my own after training. So
That's
I
so
got to
great.
take him
That's so
out with
great.
me. It
Wow.
was. It was incredible for me because it almost became like this full circle. He had started something and here I was continuing that. So it was very special for me to be able to have him go on a ride along with me. So when I started looking at law enforcement, I really, again, wanted to remain in my community. I was able to. I got hired with Boise Police. It's a rigorous training that you have to go through, all law enforcement, no matter what agency or state that you live in. It is very rigorous to go through that training. You have to go through a police academy. You do on-the-job training. This is not a job that you get a couple of items for a desk and you sit at the desk and somebody teaches you. Your
So
first
you have
year,
like firearms training,
yes,
responder training, all this. So it takes about a year. Is that what you're going to say?
yes.
Wow.
Your
Wow.
first year is basically training, whether it's in an academy setting, if your department has additional training that's classroom, but you also have field training. And so you're not on your own. You are really in a training environment through that first year, and then you're on your own. So
Wow.
it's pretty time intensive as well as
That's a big commitment. Well, it's a big commitment. Yeah.
it is. It really is a big commitment. And in preparation for that, whether I wanted to pursue this or not, I actually was able to do ride-alongs. I met some people and talked to them. So I kind of did my own homework and background to find out if this is something that I wanted to pursue. And I remember taking a ride-along. I think it was a swing shift, and I just loved it. I was like, I can do this. I love this. It was a lot of fun.
So there isn't, is there any, because if I were thinking of that as a young woman, I would have gone, well, everything is great about it except for using the gun and the danger. Is there any thought in your mind at this young age that it's really dangerous, or you don't really feel that way?
You definitely know that there's some danger associated with it. The training prepares you for that. You do a lot of scenario-based training as well. So you're put in positions to try to de-escalate situations. You're also put in positions that people will aggress you. They may have weapons themselves, and to make you think about that and what will you do? Are you prepared? Do you feel trained? Do you feel ready? And there is conversations that individuals have to have on their own on whether or not that is something you have to think about. Would I ever be able to take someone else's life if I had to? And it is a question that each person individually has to ask themselves and be able to answer. And when I train law enforcement now, I remind them of that because we hope to never have to. But if there was a victim and I was the difference between that victim's life or death, I have to be willing to sacrifice myself and to also take that person's life and protect that victim. And that's something that's an individual-based question. Nobody can tell you that you're going to do it. You have to decide whether or not you can on your own. So when you talk firearms, it is very dangerous. They are very deadly. Because I grew up on a farm and I was also around a lot of guns. Being rural, my family hunted. So I was familiar with them. I didn't use them as much as my brother did or my uncle, but I did know the safety about them. I was not afraid of them when I was younger and as I grew up. But I hadn't shot a gun myself very often, which is good and bad. The firearms instructors, and they were happy I hadn't because I didn't develop bad habits.
Right. They could train you.
Yeah. Yeah, so they could train me better, but I wasn't super proficient with one because I just hadn't manipulated it. I hadn't used it. I wasn't used to how you take it apart and clean it. So there's a lot to that as well. But that's all the training that you're getting in the academy as well.
Well, and are you one of the few women in this work that you're doing at this point in your life, or there are many women joining the force?
No, there was very few women.
Hmm.
When I started with Boise Police, again in the late 90s, it was very much a male-dominated job at that time still. I believe, if I remember correctly, I was the 7th female at
Okay.
that time.
Wow.
So there was
Okay.
only seven women out of approximately 200 sworn.
Oh,
So
so yeah,
it's,
they were very outnumbered
yeah,
by
yes,
the male
yes,
force. Yeah.
absolutely.
So you decided to do it, right? You fell in love with the ride along.
I
Your
did.
your grandpa had made it, an attractive idea to be in that field, to do things and be in a community activist world.
He was. Yeah, he inspired me.
That was great. That was great. For the audience, it's kind of odd when I hear about your father, who was my uncle, who I barely knew. I was the adopted family member with my mother, who stayed very far away from her family. So here we are, many, many, many years later, catching up,
Yes.
which is fine. I'm happy I'm here to listen. And so you did this, and you stayed as a police officer for years and years. And how did that evolve a little bit?
So with most agencies, any law enforcement agency, you are patrol first. You don't jump into a detective role. You don't jump into specialties. You get the basic understanding of what it is to be a police officer. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I do not think that you can go into any type of specialty without having boots on the ground, the work out in the community, understand the dynamics that are happening, maybe areas where you have higher use of drugs or where you have higher crime rates. You have to understand all of your community and the people in it before you move to specialties. So I loved being on patrol. That is the heart of any agency. As a patrol officer, you have opportunities, and I took advantage of a lot of those opportunities. First, I became a crime scene investigator. So I was also a patrol officer. I would respond to an initial call for service. I might handle, let's say, Kir, your house is broken into. I would show up for that report. I would talk to you. I would gather all the information for the report. But as a crime scene investigator, I would actually then look for evidence and process that scene myself. So that gave me a unique perspective to work with people a little further, because as patrol, you come in, you gather the information, you clear the call, and you're on to the next. As crime scene, I would spend maybe an hour with different victims on different crimes while I'm processing for tool marks. How did they break into your house? I'm looking for fingerprints. Maybe if it's a vehicle, I'm looking for tire tracks. I'm looking for shoe impressions. So I was gathering all the evidence, collecting it, photographing it, and I really enjoyed that because it really slowed it down and gave me that opportunity to really work with a victim, listen to them, let them talk, share with them. So that's really kind of what changed a lot of what I wanted to do in the department, because I started working more with victims of domestic violence.
Hmm.
I was processing those scenes, photographs, taking photos of injuries,
Is
broken
that
items.
something commonly found in law enforcement? There are domestic violence situations in most communities that recur, and is that something most officers are going to encounter?
Yeah, they will. They absolutely will. Domestic violence as a whole, you can call it family violence, intimate partner violence. Law enforcement across the United States will respond to family violence, whether it's the intimate partners or it's adult on child. Those are the highest rate of calls that we have across the
Wow.
United
Wow.
States. So there's some level, whether it's brothers, sisters, it's the parents and the kids, it's adult kids on parents. But those are some of the highest calls that law enforcement will respond to. And intimate partner violence, when it is the two intimate partners, is not only a call that law enforcement will respond to, but is also has the potential of being very dangerous for everybody involved in that, to include law enforcement.
Yeah, it was just when you're sharing that, I'm thinking those are probably the most volatile situations because there's
They
such a
are.
big, strong emotional connection.
They are. They very much are. You have the volatility of the emotions. You also have, if you are dealing with a victim and a predominant aggressor who holds power and control, that becomes very dangerous because the abuser that has that power and control becomes threatened by any first responder. Law enforcement, by nature of the job, is about power and control. We have the ability when we show up on scene that we control the entire scene. We have to for everybody's safety. So that actually directly threatens a domestic violence abuser.
Well, and when you're saying it, the hair is going up on the back of my neck. I'm like, she knows what's going on those scenes. So I hope for most of us, we're not experiencing that. But I think for all of us, myself included, there was a year and my son and I were at each other that, that could have been a phone call we made. I think it hits a lot of families. It just does.
It does. It absolutely does. And there are situations that are not about power and control. For example, Kir, when you're talking about you and your son having some dynamics, those do happen across the United States where you've got maybe an adult son or even a 17-year-old, child that is butting heads with mom or dad. And you could have family situations. That isn't the same as the domestic violence, power and control that I was discussing. Predominant abusers are the ones that the individuals hold the power in the relationship, and they will use controlling tactics to make their partner, their intimate partner, do what they want, say what they want, act and behave the way they want. And those are the very dangerous ones. We actually know statistically as well, there is evidence backing up research that's been done by several organizations in the United States that show that predominant abusers are the ones that also will attack first responders, especially police. We get in high-speed pursuits with them or chases with them. They will attack law enforcement when they show up, but they also have very violent records. So not only are they a threat to their intimate partner, but they're a threat to first responders. They're a threat to the community as a whole because, again, they have violent backgrounds.
Well, that's a lot. So you took all that on and now you jumped in when you became, a CSI on the scene. And yes, I'm sure that I don't even want to ask how many times have you been verbally, verbally assaulted or someone physically tried to assault you when you showed up on a scene. So you're going to these, I hope, with a partner, correct?
Yes. And I encourage when I do training now that domestic violence calls for service, law enforcement should never go alone because of the probability of there being an abuser that is going to target law enforcement. And our duty in law enforcement is to protect the victim. So we cannot do that as good when we are by ourselves, especially if you've got an abuser that maybe is lying in wait. They're prepared for our arrival. They ambush law enforcement. And unfortunately, we know that happens because there are law enforcement across the United States that on a weekly basis, their lives are taken due to responding to domestic violence.
Yeah, no, you know the statistic. Well, I'm already going to ask you, are you going to write that book that we all need? But
I've been asked that. I'm just not sure when I'm going to fit that into my schedule.
I hear you, but the way you speak of it without, there's no inflammatory language. It's just the structural issues you encounter and the intensity of it, and you're clear about it. That's refreshing because I think we're missing right now in our dialogue the simplicity of the truth and clarity. So I really appreciate your sharing all that. So then you
Absolutely.
you stayed as a primary a patrol woman, and some other ideas came, right? Some other things you wanted to work with.
Yeah. So when I was in patrol, I was the crime scene investigator. I also took on a couple extra duties as a patrol officer because, I figured I wasn't busy enough. I became a field training officer. So I actually trained new officers. My favorite ones to train, honestly, were women. I loved when other women would join the department because we have unique challenges being females in a male-dominated employment, that it was really nice to not only be able to train a female officer, but mentor them and lift another female up to say, you too can do this job.
That's
It
great.
is not, for a long time, I think it was so male-dominated, and the belief is only men can do this because of their strength. And women bring so much more to the table. We are more empathetic. We have an easier time, honestly, connecting with a child on the scene and being able to make them feel safe or help to calm and de-escalate things. So women bring a lot of different characteristics or behaviors or traits to a department that are really good. It's not saying that women are better than men by any means. We both have our strengths, and both men and women have their weaknesses too. And I think that we complement each other in that. And I've seen in law enforcement that women really do complement some of the areas where men aren't as strong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was going to say there's an emotional intelligence in women that, brings a whole different level of awareness to anything you encounter. So you decided to do more. Now you have to, do you have more? So now you have children to raise.
I do.
Things have shifted in your personal life, maybe.
They
I'm
did.
sure they grew or they changed. Everything changes as we
They did.
every day. And now you want to do more. Okay. Well, this is you have to ask yourself, so who is this woman, Sherri, that keeps adding to her plate? Hence you're here. So what did you look into next, Sherri?
Well, I did, as you mentioned, I did have at that time 2 children, and my personal life definitely shifted as well. I was single with my 2 kids, raising them, and I would not change that. I do not look back at that. I don't have regrets for any choices or anything that was happening. I don't have regrets over adding to my plate at work either. Everything that I did really helped my kids as well, because what I was doing for the community, ultimately, my children are also benefiting from. Both my kids lived here with me. I raised them. They went to school here.
It's a
So
lot. Yeah.
protecting that community was also protecting my children. They both knew the job that mom was doing. They knew that I was a police officer. They had seen me in uniform. They saw my police car when I was on patrol. When I
That's
did
pretty
become
cool.
a detective, they were able to see my unmarked car, and mom didn't dress in a uniform. I was plain clothes, but they didn't know the details or the ins and outs of what mama did. That's one thing that I was very protective of my children. They did not learn until I retired all the different things, because I didn't want them to be jaded one way or the other. I also did not want to influence them in what they chose to do with their lives. I did not want it to be, oh, I have to follow.
Excuse me, you mean you're a good mom? You don't want to have many children who are mini yous.
Yes, I didn't.
You did it.
If they decide somewhere in the future that they want to go into law enforcement, I will support that. I did not want them to feel like they had to. I wanted them to find their own path in life.
That's
So I
beautiful.
was very protective. And there's a lot of parts of law enforcement that are really ugly. There is a lot of law enforcement as a whole sees the worst things that one person can do to another. And those are things you don't share. You don't unpack that at home with your family, and you don't unpack that with your significant other. You unpack that in your safe places. If you're religious, it's with your bishop, your priest, your father, your rabbi. If you are not religious, even if you are religious, a counselor that understands the language of law enforcement. That's your safe place to unpack it.
Well, I love what you're saying, because yes, if you are in that field or any field where you're working with people who are struggling, and that's what you're dealing with, people sometimes mental illness or abandonment issues, and so they become incredibly overbearing and controlling and violent. It's traumatizing. That's a lot of trauma. You
It
can't
is.
just you can't carry it alone. So I like what you're sharing, because I think we all need extra help in life, and there is help for everyone. So we take advantage of that. Absolutely. So you're doing all this. So how did I don't know what the next gig was. Tell me the next layer of your journey. Tell us.
So after I did patrol, I was on patrol with Boise for about 12 years, and I was a crime scene investigator for about 10. I was a field training officer for about 6. So I did all those 3 at the same time. And then in 2012, Boise Police Department had the first domestic violence detective position, and I put in for that. I had already been drawn to that through my crime scene work and working with families, because what I was seeing is that law enforcement responds to a call for service, takes the information for the report, makes an arrest, gives a citation, or they leave, and then we leave. Any of those 3 choices, but then we leave. But what was happening is we were coming back to some of those. And what I was seeing as a crime scene investigator is that the children were also being impacted. And initially, maybe we didn't know that the child was being injured. As a crime scene investigator, spending that time with that domestic victim, I also would have interactions with the children. So I was seeing that there was more to this, and it felt like we were going to the one call, handling the call, and we're leaving. And maybe the courts are going through the court process to adjudication, and even when the offender might be held accountable in court, that family is still back together, and we're there in 6 months. So as I'm seeing this, I'm thinking we're not handling these calls as a family unit. We can't handle this as one call, put a Band-Aid on it, and we leave. Now, that's not saying that every victim in domestic violence is going to willingly, readily leave that relationship, but we were also not understanding in law enforcement, why is the victim not able to leave? Instead of asking the age-old question, why doesn't the victim leave? Why is the victim unable to leave? Why is the victim unable to change the circumstances? And so I
Very good
really
question.
became passionate about changing the dynamic of the question and figuring out what more can we do in our society that we're missing to help this family as a whole unit. So when that domestic violence detective position came open, I put in for that. I was selected, and I spent the remainder of my career working with families of domestic violence, both physical and sexual violence.
Does that position exist in other departments around the country?
Generally speaking, there is, well, small agencies, I can't say if there are. Unfortunately, if it's a small agency with limited manpower, you might have a detective that is handling persons crimes, property crimes, as well as domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to depend on manpower. Larger agencies, though, have at least recognized the need for a domestic violence unit. And often you'll have one or more detectives that are handling those reports that come in from patrol. Because as a detective, you're not working on the initial call for service. As a detective, you get your reports from your patrol officers, and then you are working that case and doing the further investigation all the way through trial.
Wow.
So it might
Wow.
be a re-interview of a victim. It's identifying witnesses that weren't interviewed. It's following up with that victim with medical. If they have to respond to the hospital the night of the incident, you're getting medical records. You're also following up the next day. We're taking additional photographs of injuries as they present. We're setting up specific interviews of children done by social workers so that they're not interviewed by law enforcement. So you're doing all of this extra work, this extra investigation, because law enforcement's job is not to decide who the victim and the perpetrator are.
Right. I
It's
was
to
going to ask you
gather
about
the
that. Yeah.
evidence. It's gathering
Right.
the evidence and the information.
And so this person, this detective, is also going to be involved in the family court setting on behalf of the victims?
Usually not in a civil setting. Law enforcement
Okay.
only has jurisdiction in criminal.
Okay. And
However,
criminal. All right.
I had recognized during my time as a detective that we were not looking at the civil side, the family law side. So as I trained law enforcement, and I did this when I was a detective working my cases, is identifying in the community what lawyers are able to work with victims that maybe they need a sliding pay scale. There's lawyers that have to do some level of pro bono. Who are they? If you have a victim service center in your community, do you have lawyers that donate some time? Do you have legal aid in your state or in your community? And making sure that your victims are hooked up with those resources, because I can guarantee if your victim in the abusive relationship has children with the abuser, if they do not know a way to protect their children and do that with legal help, they will go back to that relationship because they can't
Yes.
survive on their own. They need
Well,
to have
yeah.
some resources and direction.
Now, and I'm going to ask you a very, you don't have to answer anything I ask, but so you've been drawn to help these families and the children in particular and pay attention to how that family is so broken. If it can't possibly be sustained the way it is. So let's give them some services. Let's also pay attention to psychological trauma. Was there a particular reason in your own history that made you decide you like this work, that you were drawn to it?
Yes, there
Okay,
is.
that's all you have to say.
I'm happy to share.
Oh, well, if
Yeah,
you want to. I mean, I
no,
think I'm reading between the lines because not that I know it, but I've been drawn to things in my life because of what I didn't see in my personal family life. I saw the missing pieces, so to speak.
yes. Growing up, there was 4 siblings. I had 2 sisters and a brother, so there was 4 of us. My brother was the youngest, and I had a younger sister and then an older sister. So in the hierarchy, I was the second. I always was kind of, even as a child, the protector of the 4 of us. And there was a lot of substance abuse in terms of alcohol. And again, during my time growing up, I'm dating myself, but this is the 70s and the 80s. And there's a lot of alcohol. Between the alcohol, which changes people and dynamics, and we know that,
For sure.
there was a very high level of emotional and psychological abuse in my home, in my core home. And that's why my grandfather was always kind of my escape for me. So in my core home, there was a lot of verbal pretty much daily, psychological, and then there was property damage. The alcohol escalated a lot of that emotional, verbal abuse into becoming physical. And as a child, I remember very much feeling like I couldn't change anything. And nobody listened to us, and nobody was protecting us. And that was really hard as a child.
Yeah.
And so when I would respond to these calls, I could see my younger self in some of these kids that had fear. And so that really changed for me where I wanted to focus because I knew what it felt like. Nobody's
Yeah.
listening. Nobody hears me. Nobody's protecting me. And that children are raised to look at anyone in uniform with a level of respect, whether it's
That's true.
military, fire department, EMS, law enforcement, right? That you can trust them. If you're in danger, you go to the uniform. Well, if a uniform shows up at this child's house and they don't take mommy or daddy out that are abusive, what's the message we're leaving with the child?
Yes. Basically, you're saying, Lee, you deal with it. Good
Yeah,
luck. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I'm going to just kind of identify a little. Because you're not alone. As you know, my mother was an alcoholic. I'm the middle child. I'm actually the surviving child of that family. And I think the reason is because as a young child, I learned to navigate the things you should never have to navigate as a child. And I've learned how to have empathy, compassion, but first I guess I did. I had to forgive them and forgive me and take myself off the hook that I could have fixed that situation. So I hear a lot of healing in you, Sherri, and a lot of tremendous compassion and identification. So thank you for sharing all that. That's a lot,
Thank you.
but
It was.
thank you. Thank you.
Cute. The healing for me, a lot of it came in the work I did because I knew I couldn't, you can't come in and right, save everyone. And it should never be a goal for any law enforcement is that you're going to come in and save the day. We don't do that. When you work with adults, when you work with humans, you give them different choices and you show them
Hmm.
different opportunities and it's on them to choose those and you support that choice. And in supporting them is what ultimately helps them to maybe change their own trajectory of that relationship in life. But the healing came in seeing these kids have a voice and their parents knowing what the impact was, where before maybe that parent thought they were protecting that child. If I stay, then he or she will direct it all at me and I can protect my kids. And when the parents were realizing how much damage it was doing to their kids through these interviews that we were doing. They're called
Hmm.
CARES, forensic interviews. There's different terms for them, but they're done by social workers in a very controlled setting. There's non-leading questions. So the child is able to actually talk about whatever is important to them. And when those are happening, they're observed by detectives. The child is never interacting with the detective, and the information that they share is then typically shared with the victim. And so when that mom or dad is finding out that they're not, in fact, protecting their kids and the damage that's being done, sometimes that was enough for that parent to
Right.
realize, I need to make a change and I don't know what that looks like and I don't know how to do it. So for law enforcement, we're not saving them. We're saying, okay, victim, you're ready to change. Here's something else. Here's another choice. Here's another choice. Here's another choice. These are all your choices. And you choose what's right for you and your family. And we're so quick in law enforcement sometimes to say, I know what you need to do and you need to do this.
Right.
That's not the way
No.
that we can really help.
Well, you're empowering them to take action, whether that's a great choice, whatever level that is for them. It could be simple as putting an extra lock on the door and getting a order protection. So, you're giving them a choice. It's so empowering. Yes, listening to you the way I guess I'm hearing my own 40 years of great psychotherapy and everything you share.
A lot of people, we know that there's a lot of abuse that people of our generation
Hmm.
did go through because when you look at law enforcement in response to domestic violence, look at over the course of even in my career, it's changed, but even before me, from the 70s to where we are now,
Hmm.
the dramatic shift in law enforcement as a whole. The biggest one is that we no longer ask the victims if they want to press charges. We don't walk away from that. We identify if there is domestic violence, and we recognize in law enforcement that if I see that there's domestic violence in this home, there's injuries on, let's say, the wife, and the husband's hands are beaten and bloodied like he's been punching on her and the kids say, "Daddy hit mommy," multiple times. Law enforcement no longer, in the 70s, they would say, "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" And if she said no, which she would, they left. And the kids weren't talked to. Kids were heard and not seen, or seen and not heard. I said that backwards.
Right.
Yeah, seen and not heard. And so there was no voice given to children at that time period. The shift of law enforcement really has happened because some very not good things that happened in the 70s. Many of those women that were left in that home ended up being continually beaten, and some even lost their lives. Because of that shift in law enforcement response was, we cannot handle the calls that way anymore. It is the one area where, if we recognize that we have a victim of domestic violence, law enforcement needs to take action to protect the victim and any children that might be in that home. And so we no longer ask. We now take the appropriate action, because with the power and control, if you ask a victim if she wants to press charges, we're giving her the power. And so we're essentially putting a target on her back for the abuser.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, yes. Well, I can say yes, because I think the reason I know this is because I've seen enough CSI episodes on TV where they do it wrong and the guy kills the woman usually, or very occasionally the woman kills the guy. She's the abuser. It can go either way. Wow. Very powerful shift. Very powerful. So I want to ask you, isn't there another piece you've added? It's about autism.
Yes. So my son, he, let's see, my kids are 8 years apart. And it was very different. I raised my daughter kind of with that child handbook we all get that says you do this at this age and this at this age. And she followed along with that. And here comes my son. And what a blessing. Both my children, they are the blessings in my life and my legacy. My son came along, and I've tried to do that same thing with her parenting, and it's not working. And I ended up taking him in and having him evaluated. He was diagnosed on the spectrum. He is what was considered high functioning. So essentially, people will look at him and say, "Oh, it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, walks like a duck. He must be a duck." He's not. He takes things in differently. He processes a little differently. And when he was younger, he struggled with understanding sensory. He would have sensory overload, which might be sight, sound, smell, something bothering him that he's not able to tune out, right? We all learn, if we're in a classroom environment and there's lights going and maybe they're flashing, we all learn we have to tune that out, pay attention to the teacher, you stay in the class, and eventually it'll stop. Someone that is on the spectrum, and we know that about 3/4 of individuals diagnosed with autism have sensory processing issues. So that strobing light, they can no longer tune it out. It becomes the focus, and it becomes so overwhelming that they will either, potentially they could throw something in the classroom, they could scream, or they could run out of the room. They don't understand how to process it or how to shut it out. And so that behavior often was becoming misunderstood as defiance, or they have an anger issue. They have behavioral. It's a behavioral output we see, but what's causing it? And so it's been very misunderstood for a long time.
Yeah.
By general society. It also, though, the behaviors of individuals on the spectrum are very easily misunderstood by law enforcement, fire departments, and EMS, all your first responders. So everything we learn in law enforcement in an academy, we look at someone on the spectrum and the behaviors we see, and we put them in the no category, defiant. When they're not being defiant, we're just misunderstanding the behaviors we're seeing.
Right. And then I think there's maybe a need for them to protect themselves from the overstimulation. And the coping skill is get out or yell and get away, or, there's all kinds of responses. So you identified this at first in your family and your son, but then why did you bring it into your professional life, this awareness? Tell me.
That was also personal as well. When I train on it as well. My son, actually, when he was in 3rd grade, he was verbal. So he would be considered, they used to have high functioning, medium functioning, and low functioning. They have renamed it to level 1, 2, and 3, just because we put stereotypes behind labels, but they still do have categories, level 1, 2, and 3. And the difference between them is really A lot of it relates to the verbal ability. So you've got verbal autism, you have nonverbal autism. My son was verbal, but in a heightened crisis state, his verbal skills are gone. He's not able to talk. He would go into what they call rote speech, repeating something over and over without having any understanding of the context of it, no emotion behind it. It's just a repeated speech until he's de-escalated and then he's able to talk. So when he was in third grade, he was 7 years old at the time, and he was very little. He weighed all of about 42 pounds, and it was Halloween. I'll never forget because it's the day that I withdrew him from school. And he was on an IEP through school, and I always felt like they were trying to fix him. And he's not broken. His brain is wired differently, and once you're on the spectrum, you're always on the spectrum. And I think that's important for people to understand. They're not broken. They don't need fixed. You're not going to give them medication that's going to correct it because it's not a chemical imbalance. It's how they take in information and how they process it, and then what that looks like for communication out to the rest of the public. And for a child, development of a child is difficult already. But now if you have input and output that is not neurotypical because they're diagnosed on the spectrum, it might take longer and it might look differently. And for Connor, he was overwhelmed when he was out of routine because most individuals on the spectrum like structure and routine. So if you imagine on Halloween, elementary schools have classroom parties. They were wearing costumes, and all of this is so he, again, it's on Halloween, and so he's out of routine and out of structure. He had an IEP, which included de-escalation, what to do if he was becoming overwhelmed. A lot of that included contact with me. I had an ability with my son to be able to de-escalate him very quickly. And that's something that he and I had worked on. And so I get a phone call, and I'm working. I was in my detective role with Boise Police, and I get a call that I need to respond to the school. And when I go to this school, I show up, and there are 3 uniformed officers with another agency. It's not my agency, another one, that are in the room, and 2 of the adult males are sitting on top of my son who is face down, and he's in handcuffs.
Oh, no.
Now, remember,
no.
He's 42 pounds.
He's a little kid.
He's a little guy. And the principal was standing over my son with his arms crossed, and the 3rd uniformed officer was back away. He wasn't near my son, but he was just back away. And so I immediately asked all 3 if they knew that he was on the spectrum and had an IEP, if they'd been advised, and no one knew anything about that. No one knew anything about that he was on the spectrum. His diagnosis is autism as well as anxiety, which is fueled by his autism. And he also was diagnosed ADHD. And no one knew anything about any of his diagnosis. They had just been dispatched to the school. Through all of this, I ended up pulling him from school. I knew that I'd had some struggles with the school already, and I knew they were just basically wanting my son gone. They weren't protecting him, and I withdrew my son from school. And I went back to work after I got him settled at home. I needed to go get some things at work, and then so I could come home and be with him. So I had my friends come over. His older sister was here. She was 15 at the time, and she was huge, still is, his number 1 supporter, aside from me. Yeah, she's very protective of her brother.
Nice.
So he was safe at home, and I went back to school, and I'll never forget, my captain asked me what he could do to help me. And I said, you could let me train law enforcement, because everything that happened with law enforcement, this was wrong.
Wow.
And they didn't have the tools, and they didn't have the knowledge. And I said, we don't take answers from people. People don't tell us how to do our job. We have a job to do, and that's to protect victims, and we failed in this. And I quickly explained what had happened to my captain, and I said, we deal with individuals on the spectrum of all ages, because once they're diagnosed, you don't outgrow it, you're not fixed, you have it your entire life.
Yeah.
Individuals on the spectrum, though, often learn coping mechanisms through therapy and through different help. Early intervention definitely gives them the ability to self-advocate. And so I said, we're misdiagnosing behaviors. We are quickly assuming that they're being deceitful because they're not looking at us in the eye. And I said, universally, an individual on the spectrum will not look you in the eye. They can't. They're not taught to, and they can't do it. It creates more chaos for them. And I said,
more
do you know
anxiety.
why? Yeah, and he didn't understand. And I said, so I explained it, and he's like, I never would have known. And I said, exactly, because we're failing to train. And I said, that comes back on law enforcement as a whole. If we fail to train, we're responsible, because that is
right.
Our responsibility is to, if the training is there, It's our responsibility to train our troops to know how to interact with successfully all individuals. And individuals on the spectrum is one of the number one disabilities where law enforcement, it can be messed up so easily because we misread, misunderstand the behaviors, and we don't know how to de-escalate that.
Right. It sounds like they more than overcorrected your son by sitting on him. I'm surprised he survived. Yeah.
It was a very, very difficult time. And it was a number of years before I could share that in training, but I did because from a mom's perspective, it was incredibly overwhelming. Like I was ready to come unglued. From a law enforcement perspective, though, I was very disappointed in my fellow officers. It wasn't my agency, but they were law enforcement like I was. And I thought, shame on us. Shame on all of us for not knowing who our community is. We've recognized autism. We've done a lot of training on awareness of it, but there's still this, at that time, there was still this lack of how do we interact with them more successfully? Because if you take the concept that when law enforcement shows up on scene, that we own that scene, we control the individuals, then whatever happens, law enforcement's responsible for that as well. And you can't blame the individual on the spectrum and say it's their fault. If you don't understand anything about autism and you have had zero training, then it is not the individuals.
Well, yeah, I mean, wow. I mean, everything you're sharing, I myself included have a limited understanding of what law enforcement deals with and how daunting it is to do it well, how daunting. And now, so you're doing this program. Are you doing this after retiring as a detective, or tell us more?
Yes, okay. I started training in, I think it was in the first class that I did was for my own agency. I developed curriculum, and so this is 2013. My son was born in 2005. So over the course of his time, I had become connected with different organizations in my own community regarding autism. I had done a ton of research. I had gone to a lot of trainings. And so when I say I developed the curriculum, it was from a lot of the trainings and the expertise that was out there already. I had the opportunity to listen to a training in a webinar at the time by Temple. So there was a lot of information that I was gathering from people that were able to discuss their own path of autism, as well as a lot of the education that was coming forward in books. So I put together a curriculum specifically for first responders, which was initially, like I said, it was my department, but I also did training for paramedics, because paramedics, when they first show up, the first thing they do is grab a hold and touch someone. They're usually there for medical reasons, and they're trying to figure out, do you have an injury? Yeah. So by nature of their job, they are immediately going to touch them, which is the point of you're going to get hit. They're going to pull away or they're going to strike you because you've grabbed them.
Yeah.
And their mind is like, yeah, it's a trigger.
Yeah.
And so the training that I, again, put together was geared for first responders on understanding, a basic understanding of autism, the most common characteristics or traits that you're likely to see, which go completely against law enforcement training. So we look at eye contact. If you're not looking at me, law enforcement thinks you're lying, you're deceitful, or you're going to run, right? We put a lot
Probably
in
what you're trained. Yeah, you're trained
and that's
about.
what our training comes from. So, again, a lot of those common behaviors are in the training, as well as how to more successfully interact with not only the individual, but a family member. So something that we're not used to in law enforcement is if I show up in uniform to a call and Kir, you're the person I'm going to talk to, I don't want anybody else around you. I'm going to tell everybody else to go in the other room, write a statement, I'll come talk to you. And I'm going to talk to you one-on-one. When you're dealing with somebody that is on the spectrum, we're not going to talk to them one-on-one. If you're my individual Kir, you're on the spectrum, I'm going to have your caregiver, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your best friend, whoever it is that you trust and that knows you, they're with you while we're talking.
That's a huge
change.
Yeah.
And it is. That's a huge shift in how law enforcement operates. And there's resistance when you don't understand why. Kir, if you're escalated, you're not going to talk to me. It's like Connor. I already mentioned, when he's escalated, his verbal skills are gone. He doesn't always have the ability to say what he wants to say, but he's also not hearing your question, so he can't process it until he's at a calmer state. So I'm not going to get anything from him. Where am I going to get the information? If it's Connor, it's going to come from me. I'm going to be able to tell you, this is what happened before. Here's the triggers that led up to what you're here for. Here's how you de-escalate my son. And here's the things that will set him off again. So
Wow.
for a first responder to know to stay away from that so that you don't re-trigger them.
Well, and this kind of information, Sherri, I mean, every one of us encounters people on the spectrum, whether it's in a restaurant or at a school event. And without knowing how to interact, we often create more fear, more anxiety. And it's just, for anyone listening, share this podcast with everyone you know. It's not just for law enforcement.
No, it's not.
So you're doing this in your retirement from being a full-time detective. So I noticed, I think on is it your email? Tell me your email, last part of your email. I don't want to give away your private email. There's a work thing in there. It's teaching
educator?
School educator. That's it. I was like, educators, are you working full-time?
I work part-time. And
Part-time?
my email, there's reason behind my email. My email is for my son. So I won't give that away.
Won't. I won't give that away either. No.
It was for my son.
Great. That's great.
It's his initials. No one would know that if they looked at it. It's just how I designed my email, but I am an educator. And I do, Kir, yes, I am training autism to first responders, but I've also broadened that to autism in the community. The community side of the training that I do is for community members, whether it's parents,
Wow.
teachers, caregivers, on successful interaction with all first responders so that they understand if paramedics show up, here's what paramedics do, here's their goal, how do you successfully interact with them during that time period? Same for law enforcement or fire. Ways that they can improve, bless you.
Thank you.
Ways they can improve when they're, let's say, driving their car. For example, something that seems so simple. I've had a lot of people over the years ask me, why don't you put a tag on your son? And it's like, you don't understand autism.
No.
Like a wrist bracelet, right? That says I'm autistic, or if they have medications.
No.
Because sensory, and that's what people don't understand. If they have sensory issue for touch, they may not want anything here.
Well,
Most of them don't like hats. They don't like tags in clothing. So it's all great ideas. Like if you find a nonverbal individual walking along the street, let's say a 5-year-old, we're going to be looking for something that gives us, who is this child? Where do they live? Right? So people will say, well, put tags on. Those are going to be pulled off by the child because of the sensory issues. So things that we try to incorporate with families is put something in your glove box, your jockey box, whatever people call it, various names, right? But something in your car that says, I have a child on board that is nonverbal.
Well, that could be helpful. So now, because I think Sherri's going to have to come back in a year because there's more to happen. I think you're going to be, my sense of you is you're not going to stop growing new ideas just because of who you are. So now I'm going to ask you the most important question. Can you run Homeland Security for us? So we can be sensitized to reality. When am I getting a copy of my detective shield so I don't get a ticket? No, of course, these are jokes. And we want to know, how do you have fun? I really want to know, how do you have fun? Because this is a lot to do every day.
It is.
A lot.
It is. And when you're talking about healing too, I mentioned counseling. I am religious. I'm not going to disclose a religion. We'll call it Christian. I think that we're all Christians, no matter what religion you are. So God definitely helped me heal through everything I've been through, not only as a child, but all of the trauma that I saw in my job. Counseling for me as well. But the fun part of the healing for me was with my children and now my grandchildren. I have 2 grandchildren, both little boys. I call them my grand nuts because they're Peanut and Cashew. Everybody that knows me, they don't know their real names because it's Peanut and Cashew.
Peanut and Cashew. I know. Yep. I know what I'll send you for Christmas.
And I love my family time. There is nothing like it. We travel. I have passed my love of travel to both of my children, and my grandkids have already traveled several states already.
Wow.
Yeah. So we love to take family trips. We spend holidays together. We have a family thread of jokes constantly and different things happening. My son is living in another state. My daughter and son-in-law were living in Texas, and they moved back to Idaho. So I am lucky enough to have my grandkids here. And that is really my joy. It is with my kids and with my grandkids. I just adore them.
Beautiful. So I'm going to encourage you. And I I know you're not going to take over the world at large, but I want to say you are you represent a model of sanity that, every human has special skills to bring. We just do. I believe that. I believe the essence of all of us is unique and specific. And if we get to have a life where we get to bring that inner wisdom to the front and bring it into the world, it just grows like crazy because people need us. People need you, Sherri. People need you. It's obvious. Your family and way beyond. I want to encourage you to write a little book. I wrote a little book. I'm not going to say the name, but it's how to start a practice to access intuition. Taking time out to write a book, that's the scary word, but to take time out to write a little handbook, right? Maybe a handbook on, and you could come, sure you'll figure out what to do, if ever. I think you do enough. Maybe when you're not able to move anymore, you'll write the book.
Well, yes.
Not as quick as able to drive around in your 90s, you'll write that book.
It'll probably be then because I do the training on autism, but I also train across the United States on domestic violence, and I testify as an expert as well.
I love it.
I stay busy.
I loved getting to know you this way, hearing this story as much as I've heard. I know there's even more. And if you're ever in New York State again, please let me know. I would love my extended family to meet you, my son, my daughter, my partner, just to hang out for a meal. It'll be amazing. So if anyone wants to connect with you to get more information on these programs you've started, and someone might be listening who works in a agency and they need some advice how to move forward, how do they contact you?
And I will give my business email.
Great.
So that they can contact me. So it's C, and double is spelled out DOUBLE, and then the letter C, .educator@gmail.com. And that's the best way to reach me. That's my small business. I have a sole, just me. I don't have any other employees. It's just my own business. And I do travel. I'm currently working with Texas right now to go down and do some autism training down there. I'm in talks right now with Oregon as well to do some training across Oregon on autism. I present at conferences on domestic violence topics, stalking, strangulation. So I can pretty much kind of cover the gamut.
That's wild.
I do training on neurobiology of trauma, and I testify as an expert in both criminal. I've testified across the state of Idaho criminally as well as in family law when there's a divorce case, a custody case, and there's violence. And I have testified, I'm going to testify in Washington, and then I've also got federal. So I have the ability to help in a number of different avenues.
And you wear the detective outfit, right? The suit.
Not when I'm working.
No, she's working.
Not anymore. No.
So
my shield is hung up on the wall.
All right. And so people can look for you by contacting you by this email, C, spell out double C. I'll put it on the website when the podcast comes out to have information, to have her testify, to have you raise awareness about how to be in community with others who have anything related to what we're talking about and beyond. So when I'm listening to you, I'm feeling safe. I feel like the world is safe in Idaho.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm born and raised here, so I wanted to protect my community. I wanted them to feel safe.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you, Sherri. I'm going to, when we hang up, I need your address. I'll send you a little How We Heal mug so you can tell people you're on the podcast. And I'm so excited for you to whatever this, I feel like you still have a couple of chapters in you of new experiences that you're going to unlock.
I am.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for being the second cousin who's really cool. I get to say that. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you very much. That means a lot to me, Kir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day. And
you too.
Take care. Thanks.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We want to thank the following people. Jennifer Maidman for original music. Listen to her on iTunes and Spotify. True English of Upstate Podcast Studio for sound and recording engineering. And all our executive producers. See you next time.